keeping your commitment to yourself and others. I think that that's something that builds internal confidence. And then believing that who you are, right? So being able to answer that question, who are you? And what you know is actually valuable to others. This goes back to that, that purpose, having some type of purpose, having some type of drive. When we are in a space and an element where, we know we're confident in who we are and our identity, we are confident in our gifts, our talents, our expertise, whatever that may be. Again, we can walk into the room and never have to say a word.
Have you ever felt as though your confidence has held you back in your leadership journey? If so, then today's episode is one for you. Welcome back, listener. Hello again, viewer, if you're watching us on YouTube. Today, we are going to be talking once again about confidence and associated questions. And to help me do that, my guest is Sabine Gedeon, who is an author, speaker, certified coach. She works with professionals and entrepreneurs to help them transform their lives, leadership, and more. Sabine is also a podcast host herself, so always a pleasure to have another fellow podcaster on the show. And we'll be talking today about her approach to leadership, how she helps people elevate their leadership through confidence, through influence, and through impact. Some really important and useful tips here for anyone struggling with their leadership. So stick around. Don't forget as well, as always, check those show notes, that episode description, click on the links, learn more about Sabine, get in touch with her if you like. And of course, come and join us at the Integrity Leaders online community. It's built for new leaders just like you. Again, the link is in the episode description, www.leadernotaboss.com.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Well, Sabine, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's lovely to have you on the show. Really looking forward to our conversation. And early start for you as well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, David. I'm excited to be here and excited to chat again.
Yes, me too. Our first conversation wasn't recorded, which feels like a shame. So this one is going to be, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing. And on that note, I'm really going to hand over to you for a little bit to introduce yourself to the listeners, tell everyone a bit about your background, your business, what you do today, what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Podcast interviews is first.
Obviously, yeah.
So thank you again, David, for having me. I'm Sabine Gedeon. I am the CEO of Gedeon Enterprises, which is a professional development, personal development firm that services and supports individuals, organizations, and leaders alike who are looking to really just focus on their own growth and development. So I have officially been doing this now for 6 years. July 1st, as of the time of this recording, was my 6th year anniversary, which seems surreal, crazy, exciting, and also like, where'd the time go? Prior to this, I was in HR. And so I started my career traditionally, went to school for undergrad for HR, started in HR in talent acquisition, worked in talent management, talent development. Decided that I decided I wanted to be an HR business partner very early on in my career. So I did all the things, right? I did all the projects, the assignments, the dots. If you've never heard of dots, those are development opportunities that suck, or, those development opportunities that you get voluntold to be part of. And finally got to a place where I wanted to expand and step into that HR business partner role. Got my master's in management, organizational leadership, and finally got that HR business partner role. In less than 6 months in, realized that this was not where I wanted to be or where I wanted to take my career. So being the type A individual that I was, or am transitioning away from at the time, that was actually really devastating. That was a pivotal moment in my career because I only had a plan A. And I had worked so hard to get to that plan A. So for it not to be what I thought it was going to be, or the pinnacle of success that I was expecting, it was quite devastating. And it actually, and a gift all in one setting. And so it challenged me to really take a step back and, ask myself two questions. When have I felt the most fulfilled? And when have I felt the most impactful? And the response that came back was when I was sitting across from employees, helping them map out their careers and then reverse engineering what steps they needed to take to get there, as well as when I was sitting behind closed doors with leaders and they were vulnerable and I got to see the human side. I also saw the craziness that happened at the top. And it made me realize that, they leaders at the time were often, and still are in most cases, though they have a lot more support now than they did back then, they're the most underserved in organizations. And partly because, obviously they are expected to figure things out, to have the answers. Some of it is, their ego or their pride or their fear, stops them from being able to get the support and the opportunities that they really need. And so being able to recognize that when I decided to leave corporate America in 2018, I wanted to build my business on that focus, helping individuals figure out what they want to be when they grow up, and then putting the strategy behind that. And then also helping leaders who, really have a heart to support and to lead others, but also need support for themselves, being that person for them. So that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. And that looks like workshops. I have programs around leadership development and career development, as well as one-on-one coaching.
Wow. Okay. So there's several key themes, I guess I'd call them there in your story. The career challenge that you face, that's a familiar story to so many people. I think, we, particularly when we're leaving school and college and things, and we've got our heart set, our sights set on this is what I'm going to be when I grow up, as you say. And then so often, I think, I kind of went through something on a much smaller scale, very similar to that. I know loads of people who've been in exactly that position. They've chased that career for their entire academic career. And then once they get there, it's not what they thought it would be, or they're not as good at it as they expected to be, or they just don't enjoy it. And they haven't got that plan B. And yeah, what do you do at that point? This is why I love plan B. You've got to have other options. Like it's not hedging your bets, is it? It's just sensible.
Yeah, I think, and even to this day, I don't know, somewhere, childhood paradigm programming. But for me, especially growing up, my parents, I'm actually an immigrant from Haiti. My parents are immigrants. And so the emphasis was always on, get A's and do your best and work hard. Right. And so I grew up in a household where if you got an A minus, you might as well have walked in the house with an F. Right. Like it wasn't good enough. And, to an extent that mindset served me back then. It no longer serves me now, especially as an entrepreneur like that. it would have killed me. But I think that messaging that I got very early on was, whatever you're going to do, put 120% in and, just grind it out to the end. So in order for me, I guess, to focus on whatever it was that I needed to so that I could give it 120%, I think that's where I developed that singular focus of we're going to drive this to the end type thing. Again, in some cases that works, that's helpful. But I think long term, and as you mature and as you grow and as lifes as it typically does, you recognize that, what served you in middle school to get that gold star, or even in college to get that high GPA no longer serves you as a professional or human being.
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Because you have to do it at school, don't you? Because that's the only measure of success you've got at that point. But then you have conversations, I'm sure you do, on because you've got a podcast as well, of course. And I know I've spoken to quite a few people in that kind of the high performance world. So places like Formula One and the Olympics and fighter pilots, things like that, those kind of dream jobs where probably less than 1% of people who want to do it get to do. You talk to the people who've succeeded and made it there, and they've done it. And that's exactly their mindset. They've always, it's the only thing they've ever wanted to do. They've always excelled at everything they've done. They've never needed the plan B. And when they've been successful, that's great. But the paradox to me is there's other people who've been equally successful, and it's always been what they wanted to do, and so on and so on. And they've ticked all the same boxes, except there's just one little box somewhere that they've missed and they weren't successful. And I'm always fascinated by what is the difference there? Why did one person succeed and the other didn't? And yeah, it's a rabbit hole, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be. I do a lot of work on mindset. It started mostly for me, for my own sanity, because that transition from being in corporate to being an entrepreneur was a humbling one. It's still humbling at times, as I'm sure you've experienced. And so I think there's multiple parts of it. I think if I look back at the earlier stages in my entrepreneurial journey, there was so much of me trying to figure out who I was and also like adapt myself to this new identity of an entrepreneur and figure out how to market myself and all these things. And so I think unconsciously I started becoming like this chameleon because it was like a fish out of water stepping into entrepreneurship. So I think, and obviously this is a generalization, but sometimes what might cause that lack of success, at least initially, is not a clear alignment, if you will, with whatever that goal is, whether it's in their hearts, whether it's in their mind, whether it's, some type of external pressure. And so people are going after things because they think that's what they should do versus this is aligned. This is who I am. This is like it lights me up. It's fulfilling and it's part of my destiny. So I think depending on the individual, if you really take a step back at the things that quote unquote you failed at, right? Asking yourself the question, did I even really want that? Or was I going after that because that was an expectation? Or on top of that, did I really fail? Or was that, a learning opportunity? Because who is it? Edison, right? His famous quote, I have not failed 10,000 times. I just found 10,000 ways that don't work. So if you failed at something that you really, really want, chances are you're going to keep going until you get the result. But if you fail at it and you're just like, oh, this didn't work out, I need to switch gears, ask yourself, did you really want that?
100%. And I do think, the sort of people who excel in those, the dream careers, let's in inverted commas, I think when they come to, or if they ever get to that stage of where they want to step out on their own and do something different, become an entrepreneur, I think that those people really struggle. Because to do that, you've got to be comfortable with failure. You've got to be able to, and I'm not saying those kind of people aren't resilient, but I think it's a different kind of resilience, isn't it? Mm-hmm. When you've only ever succeeded for your whole career and suddenly you're faced with failure after failure because you've started a business and you don't really know what you're doing and you're figuring it out as you go, and the economy's tough and COVID happens, and in our case, certain political decisions destroy our economy overnight. Anyway, if you're not comfortable with that failure, you're not going to have the kind of resilience to keep going. And again, I faced a very similar transition when I left my last job and set up a company on my own and all of that sort of thing. And I think I've got to the point now, sort of nearly 5 years, so I'm about a year behind you, down the line, where I'd far rather fail at something I want to do than succeed at something I don't, because that success almost traps you then, and you're stuck doing something you don't really want to be doing, but you need the paycheck or you need the client or whatever it is.
Yeah. And at that point too, that success, that external success, right? You're not growing. And I feel like that's the beauty of life. Like we get to grow, and you can look at nature, right? Like the leaves grow, the trees grow, like everything grows. And so if you're in a space where, you're collecting the paycheck or you're doing the thing and you're making an impact and you're just getting by, but the essence of who you are isn't growing and you aren't expanding, that's so unfortunate. I think as human beings, and if COVID taught us nothing, even though it seems so far removed now, I feel like when COVID first happened, or at least a few months after, it gave people that pause, that moment to question, what do I want? What have I been doing? Like, what is my life? What is real? What are the obligations? And so many people made pivots because they gave themselves that space and that time to really think and assess. So I'm saddened at times when I start to see the trend move back to the busyness and the hustle mentality and the burnout and all the stuff that we hated this time 4 years ago, that like as human beings, we've just naturally gravitated back towards that.
Yeah, I think part of that is when things get a bit tougher. It's almost the default position, isn't it? You feel like that. I think we all have that sort of ingrained thing from school, I suppose. I don't know, watching our parents, previous generations, that if you work harder, you'll be safer in your career or financially somehow. And I think we lose that kind of sense of what working hard really means. It's that question, isn't it, about, just hours versus productivity, time spent versus output. And yeah, there's a whole thing there, isn't there?
As soon as you said that, I was just like, I think it's the differentiating working hard versus earning a living. We're not synonymous. I know a lot of hard workers that don't make a lot of money, right? And so it's just, but I also know people who are in their zones of genius and they're in their element, and just simply by being in their element, they make a lot of money. So it's finding that balance for you.
Definitely. I think, the world's moved on a lot as well. I don't think that is a linear relationship anymore between hard work and value or money or, insert phrase here. Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe a few generations back, it probably was a direct correlation, wasn't there? Because if you work in a factory, for example, more hours you do, the more product you produce, the more money you make, and so on. But yeah, robots do that stuff now, don't they? So it doesn't apply.
Right.
So tell us a bit more then about your approach. What kind of leaders you work with and how you help them. I know you've got 3 areas that you focus on, so confidence, influence, and impact. How does your process work?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the leaders I work with come to me either individually because they are at a standstill, feeling stuck in some way, in some capacity in their career, and they want to create a strategy to, get to where they want to be or figure out how to stop feeling so stuck. And then also I work with organizations or through organizations who will sponsor their leaders, whether they're in high potential programs or they are individuals who they see value and they want, they're on somebody's succession plan and they want to help them build up the competencies to get to the next level. And on very, very rare occasions, I'll get that. We have someone with some development opportunities, and we need some additional or outside support and perspective. And so, I treat I have a philosophy that I believe that we're all leaders, that leadership is an innate ability that we all naturally possess. It's a matter of developing it just like any other skill or any other talent, if you will. And so anyone who comes into my space, whether you are a people manager, so to speak, or you're leading others, you're a leader in my eyes. And so we start from that basis. And my focus is really around those 3 points around the confidence, influence, and impact. And the way that I support them with that is, with regards to confidence, we really work a lot around self-awareness. And a lot of that is done through mindset work or in conjunction with mindset work. I honestly believe that, the more self-aware that we can be, the more impactful that we could be in the environment around us. It's actually baffling how many people actually sitting in leadership roles are so unbelievably not self-aware. And, and understandably so, when you look at our trajectory of growing up and becoming adults, we're not taught, to focus on ourselves, to learn about what makes us happy, to lean into our emotions, to lean into, things unless we're quote unquote gifted or whatever in the school system. And so a lot of people just go through life, through the school system, like we talked about earlier, checking off the boxes, doing all the things that they're supposed to do. And then they get into these roles and they're supposed to, be empathetic and be compassionate and all these things towards people when they've never learned how to do it themselves. So we spend a lot of time on getting to the core of who are you? That is a question that I love to ask my clients, and I don't stop asking. And I also know that's a question that most people don't like answering, because there's often two outcomes. One, they get to the point where they realize that they don't know, and I see it as an opportunity for them to figure it out. Or two, they have a sense, or maybe there's three, and then three, they hit that wall, and then they just decide, all right, I don't I don't care to know. I'm just going to be this persona that I am. So that's how we work on the confidence. So getting through the self-awareness and the mindset work. For influence, it's really about helping them get clear on what impact what is it that they want to do? What impact do they want to make? So if you think about it, we start with who are you on the confidence side? Influence is what do you want? What do you want to do? And then tying that back to what are the resources that you need, and who are the individuals within your network that you can leverage their social capital to help you get there. And then the impact is really around the strategy, execution, and accountability. So what that means is really taking the time to say, okay, well, you know who you are, you know what you want, you know what resources are available to you. Now, how do we actually put that into a plan that you can execute? And I'm there to support them from an accountability standpoint, from, putting that mirror up. I like to call them mirror moments, where if there's a blind spot that they're not aware of, that I can, put up that mirror so that they can see and help adjust as needed.
Love it. Yeah. I think, self-awareness comes up a lot, as you can imagine. And it is one of those things. You're so right. We're just not taught to do it, are we? I think back to some of the things towards even at the end of school, we had this thing in the UK where they called it life skills. Mm. And it was just kind of this catch-all for anything they hadn't taught you elsewhere. And even then, they still didn't talk about things like, empathy, human skills, really, I would call them. Mm. And it is something that, it's kind of funny, isn't it? They don't teach you that at school, because in my head, self-awareness is the first step towards actually learning. Like, if you don't know yourself, how you learn, what you do or don't know, don't always know what you don't know. That's another one. How can you then learn if, you don't know what the starting point is effectively? So it's impossible to get to the end point anyway, if there is an end point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But if you think about the system, right, it's all about conformity to an extent, right? Think about it, single file line, everyone, or if something's happening. I remember back in elementary school, everyone had to stand against the wall and you stayed on your right? Things that I get annoyed when people are walking on the left-hand side. I'm like, stay to the right. But anyways, so there's a lot of conditioning that allows us or challenges us to conform very early on from preschool up, right? So there isn't time for us to get to know ourselves. Back then there wasn't a lot of conversation around neurodiversity and, ADHD and learning disabilities, right? Because you were put in a class and put away, basically, because no one understood that, oh, Johnny is just, he's more of a visual learner than he is, it's just little things that we've now started to account for. If you think about the boomers, the Gen X's, and even what they call the geriatric millennials, which I fall into, we didn't have those luxury. I know. I hate that term, but I keep using it. We didn't have
probably in there too, sadly, but
yeah. Until I find a more, it's so disrespectful and creative at the same time. It's just you love it or hate it. So there's a lot that, because the system needed everyone to kind of fall in place or fall in line a certain way, it didn't make room. It didn't create space for people to explore. You were just trying to fit in as the person. And of course, your teachers, your parents, and all of that whole tribal mindset that we have, right? It's just about like, hey, stay within the tribe, stay within the group. And that's what we did to stay safe. So I think the more and more that I've been doing this, and even just on my own journey, I'm realizing that what we used to hear as being like the midlife crisis. Like I remember watching TV and movies and whatnot about people having midlife crisis. I think that that's the place where people start to wake up individually, because it happens at different stages in their lives. Like mine happened at like 32 or 34 with that whole job situation. So I think that something happens that allows us or challenges us or invites us to take that moment and ask ourselves, what do I want? Who am I? What do I want out of life? What do I want to create? What do I want my legacy to be? And so I think midlife crisis at this stage in my life has a different meaning, has taken on a whole different meaning for me, where it's not just like someone's abandoning their life and they're getting a Ferrari and they left their wife and kids, where it's people are waking up and saying, what am I doing? Like, I don't even know this life that I created, or this life that I created no longer fits me, and they're making different decisions.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I guess, for a lot of people, almost for an entire generation, really, that sort of aligned with the COVID years, didn't it? And it gave, maybe it just kind of accelerated the process because it gave everyone that free time. Free time, maybe not the right word, but headspace. To just focus on that, when you're sat at home and you can't go out and you've got nothing else to do, it does make you reflect. It's an interesting one. Very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at Gen Z, people have their thoughts on Gen Z, especially in the workplace, right? And, while COVID did have some negative effects on them in terms of like sociability and all that other stuff, the fact that they got their mid whatever situation at such an early age, I'm always looking for the gift in it, right? Mm-hmm. Like they were shaken early. Most of the messaging is around, all that they missed out on and all that they didn't have and all that but imagine if we had some life transforming situation like that, in our teens or whatever, like that has literally shaped who they become and how they've shown up as a generation versus prior generations. So, I think you can always look at from both sides. I'm always looking at, actually, it was probably the best thing for that generation than, anything else.
I do look at it a little bit cynically when people talk about all the stuff they supposedly missed out on because of COVID. It's, oh, you never got to do 9 till 5 in a depressing grey office. Oh, no. Oh, what a hardship, you poor things. Like,
well, they didn't go to graduation. They couldn't hang out with their friends. Like, yeah,
I'm being facetious, but it's some of it does make me chuckle though. Just like, yeah, lucky in my view. But anyway, I'd like to go back to confidence a bit, I think, because I find it genuinely fascinating, the kind of the crossover between confidence and good leadership, kind of the assumptions and the sort of preconceived notions a lot of us have about the relationship between those two things. I mean, there's this whole thing around like introverts and extroverts as well in leadership and how confidence played into that or doesn't. And yeah, so I mean, maybe if we start with how important do you think confidence actually is for a leader?
Very, very. And again, I'm coming with this from the mindset that we're all leaders, right? So confidence is an absolute necessity on so many different levels, personally and professionally. The way that I look at this, or my philosophy around this, is that confidence is sourced internally, but it's validated externally. So, oftentimes, we'll look at someone and we'll just be like, oh my gosh, she just walks into the room and lights it up and is just so confident. Or we'll look at athletes or anyone and just assume these people are confident, right? And then there'll be other people that, maybe they're like at the corner of the table, or they don't really speak, or, they seem shy and reserved. And then we make the judgment that they're not confident. What I believe what we're seeing is them projecting whether or not they have that confidence, right? Because sometimes people don't even have to say a word and you're like, oh my gosh, that person's so confident. How do you know? How do you know? It's that person's projection that's showing you that. And so, when we think about confidence, confidence is like one of those words like purpose and like all these things that like just have so much deep, rich meaning. And it's so specific to the individual person. So when I think about confidence, it's really about, do you trust yourself, right? If it's internally sourced, how much do you trust yourself? And this is another big one, we're never taught that we need to trust ourselves, right? When you think about our childhood messages, right? It's stranger danger, don't talk to strangers, don't do this, don't do that, right? Everything is, the messaging is meant to keep us safe and keep us protected, but all of it is around there's danger out in the world. And so our subconscious registers that and it's trying to keep us safe. So a person, is walking down the street, minding their business, and we see them, all of a sudden our mind is registering, oh my gosh, this person is unsafe. You need to, clutch your purse and, where's your wallet? Da, da, da. And all the person did was show up on the same street as you, minding their own business. So I use that as an example to show how much or how deeply rooted the messaging that we get as children don't really open or create that space for us to examine what does it mean to actually trust ourselves, then trust others, and then trust the situations of life. The other thing with confidence and being able to build that, or the way that I think confidence shows up for people, the internal work that needs to happen is, do you keep your commitment to yourself and to others, right? So it's just like, if you say, I'm going to do this on this particular day, and then you're always flaking, what does that mean? Right? That there's an element of trust that's missing with that behavior. But at the same time, the fact that you're not able to be, to keep your word. I think of the word or the book, The Four Agreements. I don't know if you've read that book, but that's one of my go-to books when I need a reminder that, of how to be a good human. But keeping your commitment to yourself and others, I think that that's something that builds internal confidence. And then believing that who you are, right? So being able to answer that question, who are you? And what you know is actually valuable to others. This goes back to that, that purpose, having some type of purpose, having some type of drive. When we are in a space, in an element where, we know we're confident in who we are and our identity, we are confident in our gifts, our talents, our expertise, whatever that may be. Again, we can walk into the room and never have to say a word, and people will feel that. When we tell people that, hey, this is what I believe in, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm all about, people will believe that. Why? Because we believe it. And so I think, like I said, confidence is internally sourced and it's externally validated. So if you don't feel confident within yourself, trust and believe that other people don't see you as confident. It doesn't mean you're not capable. It doesn't mean you're not competent. It doesn't mean that you don't have the potential. It's until you believe these things about yourself, you trust yourself, you maintain your commitments, you know who you are, you know that your talents are valuable, then others won't see that either. And it's going to thwart it's going to seem misaligned or misdirected or disingenuous when you try to show up one way, because others can clearly feel how you're really thinking and feeling about yourself.
Yes, I like the explanation there about the internally sourced versus externally validated. And I think so much, especially in the leadership kind of sphere, I think so many of the kind of the misconceptions around confidence come from that difference. Yes, I think I agree with you in terms of if you don't have the confidence in yourself almost, then no one else is going to have confidence in you either. But I've also seen it kind of the other way around, where other people that have allowed kind of their own perceptions, their own hang-ups, their own understanding of what confidence means impact the way they perceive confidence in others. And I mentioned the introvert versus extrovert. I shouldn't use the word versus. People get upset with me when I say that. But introvert or extrovert, I mentioned earlier, that I think is a classic example of that, because a confident introvert will very happily sit in silence in a room full of people for an hour during a meeting and never say anything. All of the extroverts in that room will perceive them as lacking in confidence because they don't speak up. And extroverts see speaking up as is confidence, isn't it, in their minds? And I think that's one of these interesting issues, isn't it? And when you apply that to a leader, so I think some of the most impactful leaders are the quiet, understated ones who just kind of subtly work the conversation almost behind the scenes. And a lot of people don't realize they're even doing it. And yet, so many of those more sort of traditional, in inverted commas, type of leaders will look at someone like that and say, well, they're not leading anything. They don't have the confidence to be a leader. And it frustrates me, but I'm also really intrigued by that whole dynamic.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm torn on this, and probably more so because I haven't done enough research to speak intelligently about it. But, it took me a while because I used to have these misconceptions on introversion versus extroversion, right? Because it was always like, oh, well, I'm just shy and all these other things, right? That's why I'm an introvert versus like, I love people. I love being social and I'm an extrovert. That's one element of it. But when you really dig deep, introversion just means that these people have a limited capacity of energy that they want to or choose to expend on engaging with others, versus extroverts. They are fueled by the engagement of others, right? So when we really break it down, like what's really happening, your shyness or your quietness or any of that stuff really doesn't matter. It's just how you're showing up. I know extroverts who they don't talk a lot. Funny enough, growing up, I was very much an extrovert. I still am to an extent, but during the pandemic, I was basically in isolation by choice and by law for about two years. And so during that time, there was a part of me that just got so comfortable to people. You want me to go out and be around people? That sounds exhausting. And that's literally because I hadn't exercised that muscle. And it took another year of me forcing myself to step out of that to get back to this place. I think I'm probably a nicely even ambivert at this point versus being totally extrovert. I'm still animated, as you can tell. But when it comes to, meetings and perceptions, to your point, I've noticed that the individuals who are, again, they can be extroverts or introverts, but who spend more time in thought and they're processing information when they do speak. It's like E.F. Hutton, right? Like when they do speak, everyone is listening, everyone is attuned to them. So I think there's also an element, if we go back to self-awareness for a minute, there's an element of being self-aware and knowing yourself enough to understand that, oh, I'm in this meeting, I'm not saying anything, so I'm not going to take on the persona of I'm just shy and nobody wants to hear what I say, versus, you know what, I need time to process information. And so if things are being shared, just saying, hey, this is a lot of great detail and a lot of great feedback. I need a moment to process this. I'll follow up with an email. I'll follow up with a note, whatever the case may be, with my thoughts on this. So it's just like at some stage, we can't use that as a crutch anymore, right? Because even if in the meeting, you're just taking in information because that's what you need to do, that's okay. But also just communicating, right? As an adult, saying, I heard everything that was said. I have some thoughts. I need some time to process. I'll get back to you. Versus, if I dare say, taking on a more victim mindset of, oh, I didn't get a word in the meeting, so I guess my opinion doesn't matter. Oh, no one turned and asked me if, what I thought, or, and just leaving it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting on a couple of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess problematic workplace behaviors there, because, yeah, I mean, the flip side of it, I think, with a lot of extrovert, I mean, we're talking about it as though it's a binary. It's very much a spectrum, isn't it? Not everyone is going to sit in the same place. People will be certain degrees of introverted or extroverted. And yeah, anyway. But I think a lot of the kind of people towards the extroverted end of that scale, actually, a sign of low confidence for them quite often can be they just talk constantly because they're worried if they don't, they'll be perceived as whatever it is they don't want to be perceived as in the situation. But I do think, and listening to you telling that story, particularly about the COVID side of it, there is an impact, I think, that context has on the amount or the place you sit on that scale of introvert and extrovert. We've gone wildly off topic here, but I'm going to keep going because I'm enjoying it. And I kind of experienced that almost in reverse to the way you've described your experience, because I spent quite a lot of time in a work environment, trying to be careful not to incriminate anyone, in a working environment where, let's just say, it was made very clear that opinions weren't sought. So you spend a certain amount of time in that sort of environment. And yeah, maybe there's a little bit of victimhood in there, perhaps, after a while, but also if you don't feel like anyone wants to hear your opinion for whatever reason, then you just keep it yourself and you become more and more introverted the longer you spend in that kind of context. And that does, I think, there is a burden on leaders in that situation to ensure that they are gathering everyone's opinions, that everyone has the chance to have a say. That doesn't always mean put them on the spot in a meeting. Sometimes they might prefer a one-to-one conversation afterwards and then you bring it to the team, whatever that looks like. But there's definitely a responsibility of leadership there. And then for me, COVID actually made me more extroverted than I was.
Really?
Because sat at home, just the two of us in the house, me and the other half, I started to lose it a little bit, if I'm honest. I needed a bit of interaction. So I started doing online networking events. I started booking as many meetings, virtual ones, because we weren't allowed out. And that actually, I started doing the podcast as well, of course. That was the other one. That made me more kind of extroverted than I ever had been in my career, certainly. Or maybe even my life. I don't know. Hard to tell. So, yeah, I think it's that context. I mean, first of all, it has an impact. And secondly, I think it will affect different people different ways. And I've lost my train of thought there. I don't know what else I was going to say, but it's fascinating. As I
say. And thank you for sharing that. And so here's the thought that comes to mind with that, even though you're introverted or you were introverted before, it doesn't mean that you don't want any contact with people, right? You still want contact with people. And you found ways that you probably weren't scheduling coffee virtual meetings like for 9 hours a day, right? You did it in a time space that worked for you, right? Like just enough time for you to expend the energy. The podcast, right? You have very specific hours on when you do the podcast. So you still are leaning into your introversion. You're just finding ways to adapt to get it when you need it and also be able to turn it off so that you can refuel when you need to. So like you're a perfect example of what I mean, that we have like agency and figuring out how do we make life work for us and get what it is that we need. This also goes back to the whole self-awareness piece, right? Like you learned something about yourself, figured out, okay, if this is a need, this is an inherent need, how do I get that need in a way that serves and is comfortable for me? And I think until we get to the place as adults or as human beings where we start to give ourselves permission to have our own needs met, then, we're always constantly in a situation where we're going to feel like the victim or we're going to feel like we're less than. That example that you gave about, the person, like leadership, having the ownership to like have to step out if the environment that you were in, right? Like your opinion didn't matter. The coach in me would be like, well, why are you there? How is that environment serving you? What about that situation? You don't answer it. Don't answer it. We don't want to.
No, I was just going to say, there's a reason I'm not in that situation anymore, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're in an environment where your voice isn't heard, your needs aren't being met, my question to you is, why are you there? Why are you there? And we can make all the excuses. Well, I have the bills and the kids to go to college. There are millions of companies out there. And so that is a limiting belief that we've somehow put on ourselves. Or really the root of that is we might really be battling with messages of I'm unworthy or I'm undeserving. But that's the thing. Most people don't, unless they decide that they want to be challenged in that way, the busyness of the day to day in life keeps us in this place of movement. When I talked about those mirror moments, those are the mirror moments that I have with my clients where I'm just like, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. I just want to put this mirror up. Like, did you see this aspect of yourself? And what it really does is it just challenges these false truths that we've adopted and we're living life as, that we don't need to. I'm a bit of a Pollyanna in that like, you know, we are magical creatures as human beings, in all that we're able to do, and the only limits that we experience are the limits that we put on ourselves. And that is a belief and a idea or a methodology, whatever you want to call it, that again, it is widespread in the coaching space, as I'm sure you're aware, but for the masses, that's not the messaging that they've bought into.
Yes. Do you know, I go back and forth on this whole concept of limiting beliefs. I really do. I think there's a limit to unlimited beliefs.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So, like, practically speaking, there are limits to things, to what you can achieve, you know, whether for financial reasons or, I don't know, if you want to be an astronaut or something, you want to go to space, or I'm exaggerating it to prove a point, but I do think, you know, yes, mindset matters. 100% it does. And the self-awareness, the way you view yourself, the way you put yourself out into the world. And all of this has, of course, massive relevance to leadership as well. But I do think it's not always as simple as just changing the way you view something, if that makes sense. Because there are, you know, there's practical concerns as well, right? It's not just mindset.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And if I may offer a challenge.
Please do.
If you talk to any 4-year-old, right, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be this. I want to be, or they go to a store. I want this. I want this. I want this. I want this. Right. We come into this world with absolutely no limitations. If you've ever seen a 2-year-old throw a temper tantrum because you put on a blue shirt versus a green shirt, right? Like there's no sense of reality, of logic, there's no sense of that. We are taught that. This is all information, messaging, ideas that we are taught by our caregivers, right? I can go to any 3-year-old right now. I want to be and ask her what she wants to be. I want to be a princess. I want to be this. I want to be a mermaid. I want to be that. And then here comes the adults. Well, that's nice. However, a mermaid can't pay the bills, right? Like that's the messaging that we put out there. And we hear that enough. And we start to believe that, which is why now we become adults that feel like there are limits, there's reality, there's logic, there's reasoning, there's all these things that stop us. But at the purest state of when we are children, we don't know that.
Yeah, okay. So I see where you're coming from. A counter argument. So if you'd asked 4 or 5-year-old me what I wanted to be, the answer would have been a fighter pilot. Couldn't do that because my eyesight didn't meet the standards. So again, like there's a biological, in this case, limitation. Anyway, yeah, we're going to get down into the weeds and the rabbit hole there, aren't we? But
I was going to say, we'll have to have a separate session,
yeah,
you and I, so we can dig through that.
Yeah.
Because clearly this is a passion for you. I mean, I'm looking at your background. We've talked. So yeah, well.
Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting one. I mean, I guess you could argue with that one, you know, that there is still a limiting belief, there is still a limitation there, but it is a social construct. Like, in theory, with corrected vision, I could be a fighter pilot, but in practice, no air force in the world would employ me to do it. So yeah, I don't know. It's fun.
We'll schedule a part 2 and just you and I.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk about something a bit more specific to leadership. I mean, that wasn't not about leadership, but there's a There's another concept that I know you've spoken about around courageous leadership. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that for a little bit. What does a courageous leader look like? And how do you think that approach helps people get the most from their teams?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So it's probably going to sound like a broken record, but I feel that the courageous leader encompasses everything that we've been talking about, right? So a courageous leader, again, courage is internally sourced and externally validated or, seen. Both you and I, right? We stepped outside of what was the path that most of us are told to go into, to step out into our own thing. And a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, that was so courageous of you to do that, right? Or, going to college or whatever it is, like little things that people do, people will just be like, oh my gosh, that was so courageous. So I'll give you an example and then I'll touch on the details. So when I was in corporate, probably a year before I actually left, way before that, I had been toying with the whole entrepreneurship thing, started a business doing resume writing and interview coaching and, was marketing to friends and family who didn't pay. And then I was just like, I'm not doing this. Like, there's no way I can be an entrepreneur, right? That's what I told myself, but it never left me. And it just kind of kept stirring. And the more and more I got into the role and the environment that I was in, and I felt the misalignment, and it was just like, it was this thing that just would not leave me, like you being a pilot. So when I decided to finally step away, or as I was making the decision, because I couldn't ignore the calling or the pull anymore, I started praying for courage. And so, like, I don't even know if woman of faith is the right way to say it, but I do believe in a higher power. And so I do pray quite often or ask for guidance. And so I knew that I needed to take this step for my career and to live out my purpose and to make an impact in the world. But at the same time, I had been working since I was 13, whether it was babysitting and retail and everything else, and pretty much self-sufficient and independent for a very long time. So the thought of not having, a salary, I didn't even have clients, I didn't know what I was doing on the marketing, and that scared me. And so I started praying for courage. I don't even know I do, but at the time I didn't know why that was the thing that I prayed for. And in asking for that courage, I made that leap. Out of corporate America, and did it with no clients. And then months after, I moved to San Diego. So I grew up in Connecticut and I'm in San Diego, California. So it feels like the opposite side of the world for me. And just like, it was just one thing after another, that just kept challenging me to grow this muscle, if you will, around courage. So when we take a step back at courageous leader, right, it's doing the thing that does not feel comfortable and that feels outside of your comfort zone, or that feels outside of the normal, whether that is as a leader, sticking up for someone who has high potential, or who has demonstrated really excellent performance, but yet they may be the shy one who doesn't talk often, or they may be considered, not to have executive presence or whatever, right? Standing up for that person. Courage may look like making the decision that, while this environment is okay or good or whatever, I need to step away. Courage, it looks like stating, hey, you know what? I'm the leader here. I'm the boss. I'm the CEO, whatever you want to call it, but I don't know everything. And so I'm going to surrender and allow others to step in that space. So when we think about courage, or the way that I like to think about courage, is it's about who you believe yourself to be and what you're capable of and the resources that you have available to you. I think about this, and I don't want to go on a rant here, but I think about one leader in particular that I used to support. And this individual, you just come across some people and you're like, you're different. like you're different. You don't belong here. Maybe they do belong there because they're the light. So 2 instances that I had with this particular leader involving me, right? One particular instance, I was getting ready to leave an organization, and this person was my leader at the time. And let me take a step back. Before I was getting ready to leave the organization, I wanted a promotion and put together like this case study and everything. And she was completely for it. Then we had to present it to the VP. And in the meeting with the VP was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Yes, we absolutely totally need it, but we don't have the budget. And it was just like this complete shutdown. And in that meeting, my manager at the time, she was just like, well, is there a way that we can look at it? And she pretty much got shut down. This was probably like on a Thursday or a Friday. That following week, Monday, it probably was a Friday, because on Monday she came into my office and she sat there and she started to, like, with tears, she was just like, you know what? I've been thinking about this entire weekend. And I realized that I failed you because I should have fought for you in that room. I should have fought for you to be able to move into that space, because her and I had been working on this role. And for me, that was probably the first time that I saw courage, right? And not this like brave whatever, but it was just the accountability, the self-awareness, the empathizing with me, right? And taking responsibility and owning where she fell short in a particular situation. I walked away as the employee with that. Wow, like that was really courageous, because as you know, she could have just came back on Monday like, hey, Sabine, sorry, didn't work out. That happens, right? And then she did. She fought for me when of course, after I gave notice, she she fought to keep me there, and I still ended up leaving. But I'll never forget that experience. It was so subtle. It wasn't even subtle. That's not the word. She probably didn't set out to be like, I'm going to be courageous today. But what was inside of her and what she knew about herself and her capabilities, that's how it showed up. And I can give you different examples of courageous and how you support. But I felt like that was a good example of when we put these titles, when we put these words, and like this nebulous thing of what this looks like, that's what courageous leadership in action looks like, right? And again, I'm pretty sure you have multiple examples as well. I look at all the people who were in HR leadership during the pandemic. I consider them all to be very courageous leaders, because I don't know that I would have been an effective HR practitioner at that time. And I have the total, they're still courageous leaders because they're still dealing with the aftermath of stuff. But, courage is one of those things that it shows up differently, and you'll know. It's one of those things like confidence, right? You know when someone's confident, when someone's courageous, you just know, they don't have to say it. They don't have to run into a burning building or anything like that, but their essence and how they're showing up for you lets you know that. I know that was like a long-winded answer to your question. I'm so sorry.
No. It's a good answer. I think, vulnerability, not that we're playing buzzword bingo, but if we were, I'd be winning. Vulnerability is one that stood out to me from that story. I think that there's a whole thing, isn't there, in leadership around being vulnerable with your people, because it builds trust, respect, there's that authenticity piece. But I think so many people struggle with it because it does take courage to do that, especially when you're in that leadership dynamic, because of the way we're traditionally taught leaders behave, and that's not really the way you do it. You don't want to show any weakness, because then you'll lose people. But I think actually that's been flipped on its head a little bit. I think it's the opposite now. It's if you don't, then you're more likely to lose people. And I think, there's some great examples, aren't there, of the courageous leader. I think for me, the ones that I always find the most compelling, I guess, are those sort of lower level or middle managers who are put in that position of being stuck between a not so great senior manager and then the people that they are leading, and they end up having to try and protect those people, or they've got to speak truth to power, that whole dynamic. And that takes real courage, but you see people do it day in, day out, often without even thinking about it or realizing that's what they're doing, just because they know it's the right thing to do. And that, I think, is what courage and leadership looks like, for me anyway.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I know we're running out of time, but that term, truth to power, when I first heard it, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's so powerful. And then there was a part of me that was like, wait, this goes back to the leveling the playing field. When we feel like we have to speak truth to power, even in that mindset and that thought, we are like creating this level. And if you can see this, but we're now putting someone on a pedestal and us lower than, right? So it's just, again, it goes back to the mindset. If you feel like you're down here, think about the relationship with our parents, right? Like our parents are authority figures, or teachers are authority figures, professors are authority figures, managers are authority figures. So if you can't see, obviously there's a hierarchy, right, there within an organization. But if you're innately going into any conversation or situation feeling less than someone or feeling lower, whatever term you want to use, you've already put yourself at a disadvantage. So while I that term is it's powerful, I don't know how else to describe it other than it being a very powerful term. I want us to be very mindful of what tone are we setting within ourselves if we feel like, oh, I have to go speak truth to power versus, you know what, I'm going to respectfully communicate my thoughts to someone. They may not be equal on the org chart, but they put on their pants one leg at a time, right? Like if you poke them, they're bleeding red. So it's just a shift I'd love to see in organizations. Again, probably why I'm not an HR practitioner today, because
No, I agree. And I think you're right to point it out. I mean, in an ideal world, yeah, everyone, regardless of their position in any hierarchy, if there even is one, again, that's a separate conversation about whether that's a necessary thing in a business today. But regardless of what your relative positions are, I think everyone should be speaking truth all the time, not just the power, but more than that, not being afraid to express their genuinely held beliefs, opinions, positions on things, you know, what we think should be done best for whatever the outcome is that we're after. Mm-hmm. But I think converse to that, yeah, there are so many organizations who have that strict hierarchy. They've got that power dynamic and it is there. There are people within it who are perpetuating it deliberately because that's how they operate and that's how they always have operated. Mm-hmm. And so it is still a problem. So yeah, it's a tough one. I think, you know, if I kind of agree with you though, because if you are finding yourself in that situation where you're maybe not through your own fault or your own mindset, but you are made to feel less than, or it's just, maybe it is your mindset, I don't know. But if for whatever reason you're in that kind of thought pattern in that situation, remove yourself from it, I think is the only thing I would suggest. I mean, that's what I did. That's what you did. It's ultimately other way, you know, it reminds me of the Einstein quote, doesn't it? You know, yeah. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. It's the definition of insanity. So, yeah, interesting. We're probably getting a bit controversial there, which is good. I like controversy sometimes. But
the way that I look at it as this is what most people are thinking. They're just not having these conversations. And when you're in corporate, for the most part, especially if you're in a large organization, like you're drinking out of the fire hose, right? And you're just trying to make it day to day. And so the annoyances, the discrepancies, like again, you look at the social uprising, it was everything that came out of that didn't just happen in 2020. That was decades of, you know, of buildup, if you will, that has like spilled over during this time. Like it was that opportunity. Again, my Pollyanna is just like, if more and more people took the time to, you know, do that self-assessment and show up as who they are, then a lot of these conflicts that we have would be eliminated. We're human beings. So there's always going to be conflict. But a lot of the things that we have accepted as normal or as, unwritten rules of corporate and challenges we don't have to experience them. We just experience them because that's what the previous generation taught. And, Gen Z, while again, I'm glad I'm not an HR practitioner right now. But they have literally just, they are giving us mirror moments day in and day out and questioning, well, why does it have to be that way? Why do we have to do things that way? Like, why can't I just talk to this person? Why can't I be part of this meeting? Which, the system, the structure that was built, I think that it worked for a period of time. And we see that on all levels of society, government, education, you name it. The system that was built, again, if we as individuals aren't growing, then we are as a society aren't growing. And so if we as leaders or people who are in positions of leadership within organizations can't see these challenges to the way of being, these challenges to the way that we do things as an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to develop, that's sad. And that's sad in a way because it deprives us as leaders to be able to grow. It deprives our organizations the opportunity to grow. It deprives our services, our customers, our clients, the opportunity to grow as well. So, for those of you who are listening, who are sitting in a leadership space, I encourage you, if someone challenges the status quo, so to speak, react or don't react. Take that moment if you're triggered, right? And start to ask yourself, what about this bothers me? What about this threatens me? What about this scares me? And you do that internal work so that you can respond accordingly versus reacting. We have a lot of leaders who are reacting at government, you name it, at all different levels, people who are reacting and not taking that time to do that self-assessment and identify, well, what is this triggering in me? How do I deal with it so that I can move on and separate it from the issue at hand?
It's been a while since I've directly managed and led people. And there was one or two who probably were Gen Z, just maybe not quite. And this is pre versus post COVID as well, because it was a long time ago for me. And I think, applying a bit of self-awareness, I think I probably would have been triggered by that kind of question. It would have frustrated me. It probably would have annoyed me. Mm-hmm. But intellectually, I 100% agree with you. I totally get it. I think actually effective leaders in a modern workplace today, you should be welcoming that kind of question, if only because it tests your own assumptions. It tests the way you're doing things. This is the way we've always done it. Should never be a rationale to keep doing it that way. And if nobody's asking that question, if Gen Z are the ones asking it, then listen. As you say, think about it. Is it because it's the best way to do it? Or might their way work better? Mm-hmm. Or even if it's not better, maybe it's just a different route to the same outcome. But if it works better for them, then why not? And I don't know why so many leaders struggle with that. But again, being self-aware about it.
Yeah.
Not done it myself, so maybe I'd be one of them. I don't know. I like to think not.
Yeah. It's human nature to want to stay the same and want to do what's familiar. But growth mindset has also risen to the top as one of the top leadership skills, right? And again, what does that mean? What does having a growth mindset mean? It means being okay with failure. It means being okay with not having the answers, right? You think of like companies like 3M. There are several out there. 3M, their Post-it notes literally was a mistake, right? It was a mistake, and now everyone has Post-it notes on their desk, like all over the world. And so it's really, do we like these words because they sound good, like confidence and courage and authenticity and all these other things? Are we really truly living them out? Because to have a growth mindset means that you're okay with failure. To have a growth mindset means that you're okay with, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. And to have a growth mindset is, I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to learn from the mistakes and I'm going to be accountable. And it's not about me. It's about we moving forward. And so I love where this conversation went because it's while there are different elements, it still goes back to the same thing. Like, if you don't know yourself, if you don't know your triggers, if you don't know your strengths, you can't answer that question, who am I? Outside of the accolades, outside of the titles, outside of the roles and everything else, then unfortunately, while you may be leading, you're not doing it at the highest potential. I won't say you're not doing it effectively, because there might be some effectiveness, but you're not doing it at the highest level and the best outcome that you could create for you and your team and organization.
Well, I have nothing else to add to that. Tell us then, what would your best piece of advice be for a brand new first-time manager?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because I run a program for first-time managers, and so the mindset, right? We'll talk about mindset. The mindset that I've seen show up is that you've been traditionally rewarded for your own individual performance. So it's an identity shift that needs to happen, right? Like, when they're like, oh, it's no longer I and it's we, and it's just like this easy transition. It's not just that it's no longer I and it's just we. It's you have to shift. If the personal value that you gain from within yourself and your worth was tied to your performance or the amount of money you made and whatnot, when you step into that role, that's going to be challenged, right? So there's an identity shift that brand new managers are going through, and they need to give themselves that space and that grace to transform, if you will, into that new level and version of their selves. The second piece for brand new managers is ask for help. That goes back to the whole, like, I've always been the subject matter expert. I'm the person that people come to. And so there's resistance. There's a little bit of ego. There's a little bit of fear of asking for help or saying, I don't know, or saying I need to get back to you. You're not going to be successful if you can't, and call that vulnerability, call that accountability, whatever that looks like, whatever term you want to use. You need support because you've never done this before. And you don't know what you don't know. And there's a lot that you don't know. And if you have a team, they're subject matter experts. Let them be the subject matter experts. The third thing that I would say for brand new managers is, mentorship, coaching, whatever that looks like, right? You look at athletes, you look at, stars, you look at whoever, right? They all have a support team of people helping them to be the best versions of themselves that we see and admire and adore on TV or social media or whatever. You need a team of people to help support you. And so that's stepping out and, depending on the relationship with your manager, making sure that your manager knows what you need and can support you. You want peers. If they're, high performing, if you have high performing peers, you want a group of people, like in the coaching space, we call it your mastermind, your little mini mastermind or little forum, but your circle of influence. You want other people who can push you, who can challenge you, give you those mirror moments. You want to make sure that you have, if you have a sponsor, that you have a sponsor, because you need someone advocating for you in those rooms that you're not. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you have someone, I like to call them the super connector. And so the super connector is that person in the organization, or it could be outside of the organization, but they know everything. They know where the dead bodies are. Like, they know how to work around people's calendars. They know schedules, right? So you want to have a super connector in your corner because, let's just say you have a project that's being delayed, or you need to have a meeting with a leader. Right? You trying to get through spending time doing all of that on your own, it's probably going to take more time than necessary. You can pick up the phone. You can send an email, build that relationship to help streamline that and make it easier for you to get done what you need to do. And then the last thing that I would say is, don't assume that everyone on your team needs the same thing from you, right? Like, again, this is an identity shift. And every single person on your team, whether you're managing 1 people or 50 people, hopefully you're not a brand new manager managing 50 people. But, everyone is an individual, and having that mindset and an understanding doesn't mean that you have to contort yourself to support everyone, but you need to understand that John works like this. He's motivated by this. These are his drives. These are his needs. Susie is motivated by this. And to the extent that you can, if you can't support them, being able to direct them to the resources that they need.
I love all of that. I think that the last one in particular, it really stands out to me because, I mean, there's that whole phrase, isn't there? I know where it comes from, but about, treat others as you wish to be treated. And I feel like that's so relevant there because actually another trap a lot of new managers fall into in that area is exactly that. If they do see them as individuals or not, it's kind of beside the point. What they do is they give them whatever they would expect for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what you should be doing is understanding each of those individuals and finding out what they want. Treat them as they want to be treated.
Right.
And that, I think, is another one. And then for your second one as well, speaks so massively to one of the biggest myths of leadership, I think, because it's not so much about that you have to be the subject matter expert, although I'm sure that is an aspect of it as well. But it's also this kind of misconception that the leader's job is to know all the answers, which it absolutely isn't. I mean, it might have been like 50 years ago. It's definitely not now.
It's impossible.
Well,
Things
yeah.
change so quickly. Like these leaders, I'm supporting a group of newer managers. They're probably 2 years into their management and probably have about four direct reports in between them. But not only are they trying to figure out how to support the direct reports, they're getting direction from senior leadership. And this is like their next level leadership, the next level above them. The organization is completely siloed, right? So they're trying to figure out who needs what and where. It's just like, there's no way, even if they spent the next 50 years at that company, there's no way that they could possibly know everything and have every single solitary answer. And what I'm literally supporting one of them with, because what their people do is because they were the subject matter expert, they've clung to that identity. So what happens is their team has an issue or the team has a roadblock. What do? They go into their one-on-ones and they're like, oh, I tried to reach out to this person or I tried to do this. It didn't work out. And for the last year, they've just been like, okay, I'll take care of it and I'll move on. And it's just like, now you're burnt out. Now you're angry. Now you're resentful, right? Like that saying, like, it's not my monkeys. I started telling him, I was just like, you need to make sure if they walk in the room with a monkey, that they leave with the monkey. You're going to give them the support and the resources to take care of that monkey, but you're not going to keep their monkeys in your office. And so that's just that's again, that comes with the identity, that comes with if the company valued me here, will they still value me if I'm not doing as much? Will they still value me or will my team respect me? And so there's just a lot of mind chatter for first time managers that putting that onus, or even newer people managers, putting that onus of knowing everything, so unfair to you. It's so unfair to you. It's unfair to the team. It's unfair to your family, I'm sure, because they're feeling the effects of that weight that you carry.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big advocate of not being that sort of hands-off manager who never does any work themselves. But at the same time, you've got to have a boundary where you're not just taking jobs off of everyone's hands as soon as they get stuck. Like, you can't do it all yourself. And if you do, there's no point being a manager. You might as well just go back to your last job, right? And just do that.
And that's the complaint I hear. It's just like, I'm just doing all the work.
Yeah. But why? Because you've taken it on.
Right.
It reminds me of another horrible cliche or proverb, isn't it? It's about, do you give them a fish or do you teach them how to fish? And I think that's the difference between being the practitioner versus the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, well, conscious of your time, I don't want to steal too much of it. So I'm going to skip to the final question. And I have to do this one because everyone has to answer it. It's my favorite one. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, alive, dead, past, present, real, or even fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Yeah. I struggled with this one because there are so many that I wanted to go with. Captain Marvel is one of the ones that like came to mind, in addition to all the real people. But the one that like I'm just gonna fall back on is Jesus, and it has nothing to do with the religion aspect of Jesus. But you talk about making an impact, right? You talk about leaving a legacy. You talk about showing up in such a way that thousands of years later, people are still trying to model who you were, right? So I know that is like, some people are going to be like, well, that's not realistic. And that's not, forget, forget realistic, right? Forget all of that. When we think about, as leaders, as human beings, we have a finite time on this earth, right? Every day counts. Every moment counts. And you've seen that meme that it's not about what you say. It's about how people feel about, you being around them or whatever. I'm probably butchering that, right? If I can leave any tidbit of advice or motivation here, is that every day you wake up, every interaction, every engagement, every conversation, every Slack, every email, every social, all of that matters. You are touching someone, you are impacting someone, whether you ever see the full effect of that seed or not. Understanding that who you are and your being matters so much, so much. And especially as a leader, the other meme that I always see is people don't leave companies, they leave managers, right? Or they leave leaders. That's how powerful you are. And so I use Jesus as the backdrop, because that is to be able to leave that type of legacy, to be able to make that type of impact, to be able to model such high character. That's an aspiration. Whether it'll ever look like Jesus, well, I've already failed. Let's just be real. But if I could leave, I don't know, a 0.0.0.001% of that when my time is up, that to me, I would have felt like that was a life well lived and impact made.
I think aspirational is the right word. And I'd be hard pressed to think of a better example of the kind of that aspirational, inspirational leader. And I think that's probably why he's such a popular choice. You're not by any means the first to select Jesus for this question. So, yeah, I really like the answers as well, where they talk about him in the context of servant leadership. I think, yeah, I mean, it was a good answer, though. It was a slightly different answer to some of the others I've had. So that's always good.
Yeah, so I have this book, The Leadership Lessons of Jesus.
Oh, okay.
And I actually found this book when I was doing my master's, because we had to do like some type of I want to call it a book report. It wasn't a book report. It was an actual paper, but it felt like a book report. And what I like about the book is they took examples that were like in the Bible and brought it into like common, like day-to-day things that we experience in the workplace. So like one example, he was preaching, and they were in a room, and I guess people were trying to get into the room, but the room was so packed. And so like they cut open the roof and they like dropped the man down. And, in the middle of it, like Jesus like responded, healed the man, and then went about. And the way that the book describes it is, sometimes when we are presenting, or sometimes in leadership, there are unexpected distractions. There are unexpected situations, right? And so you can dismiss the person and get back to what you think is important, or you can acknowledge the situation, deal with it, and then get back to the work at hand. So it just gave me this perception of, or this perspective that, the way he modeled his life is applicable in so many different areas. And there are lessons, there are leadership lessons that we can take away from that.
No, I definitely agree. I think, as you said, and as most people who choose him actually also are at pains to say, doesn't matter whether you believe the religious aspect, there's still valuable lessons there to be had.
Right.
And I think, that example is a great one, because to me, that's the core question of leadership, isn't it? Is your job as a leader, is it to have the meeting or to, I don't know, put the rivet in the thing or whatever? Or is it to create the environment for other people to succeed doing those things? Is it about those people first? I know what the answer is for me. I think I know what it is for you. And hopefully it's the same answer for all the listeners as well.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, I think that's a good point to end on. Thank you so much for your time today, Sabine. The last thing I'll say is if anyone wants to learn more about you, perhaps reach out and work with you or get on the podcast or listen to the podcast, because I know you have your own. I've mentioned that already. Where can they go? What's the best place to learn more?
Yeah, the best place is, two places. On my website, SabineGedeon.com, I actually have a page with just like free resources, including the podcast. So you can get that SabineGedeon.com/gifts. So that's GIFTS. And then also on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know that you heard me on the podcast, and I'll be happy to connect with you.
Lovely. And if it's okay with you, I'll put those links in the episode description as well, so everyone can find them easily.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, that's it. I would say that's all we've got time for, but we've gone over time, so it must have been good. Time flies when you're having fun, as they say. Thank you again so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Sabine, thank you for a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed myself. I'm sure the listener and the viewer did as well. Really appreciate all your insights there. And we got into some really good subjects there. I didn't expect to be having a conversation about my own limiting beliefs today. So that was actually quite enlightening. And yeah, I've got some work to do myself, and I'm sure we'll be speaking again. So yes, thank you, Sabine, once again. Listener, viewer, thank you for being with us today. Hope you found that as useful as I did. If you want to learn more about Sabine, as I said at the start of the episode, click on those links in the episode description. Go and visit her website, find her on LinkedIn, reach out. I know she would love to hear from you, and I've no doubt she can help you as well. Also, don't forget to come and join us at Integrity Leaders, our online community that runs alongside this podcast. And for a limited time now, you've only got a week and a half left to come and join the community and benefit from a 2-month, 60-day free trial on your membership. After that time, we will be changing the membership model. There will not be a free trial anymore. So if you do want to take advantage of that, if you want to be part of building that community and testing it out and giving me some feedback and helping shape what it might look like in the future, you've only got a week left to do that. So act now. The address is www.leadernotaboss.com. Click on the green button. Come and join us today. And I hope you'll join me again next week when I'll be speaking with Keisha Winter about her experiences in corporate America, balancing things like gratitude with asking for more equity, and the work she does today to help leaders struggling with some of those obstacles. And that's all from me today. So until next week, you know what I'm going to say, because I say it every week, but here it is. Be a leader, not a boss.